Tonight we open a book that was never meant to be read aloud, a book whose pages smell of salt, rust and long-forgotten fear, and as you listen you may begin to feel that the sea itself has been trying to tell you something for centuries. The naval logs you're about to drift through do not shout or argue. They whisper. They whisper of ports that should not exist, of harbours recorded with careful ink and steady hands, yet missing from every official map. These are not legends passed between drunk sailors. These are disciplined notes, written by men trained to measure stars, winds, and distances with their lives depending on precision. And yet, again and again, their pens hesitate, then continue, as if recording something they themselves struggle to believe. So, before I tell you today's story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications for future clips and give me some encouragement. And as you settle in, I invite you to share your local location and the time you're listening from, wherever in the world you may be drifting tonight. Now, let's begin our journey tonight. You're standing at a narrow desk bolted to a wooden wall, the deck beneath your feet rising and falling in a slow, almost comforting rhythm. Before you lies a naval logbook, its leather cover cracked like dry earth, its corners softened by years of handling. When you open it, the ink seems darker than it should be, as if it has soaked too deeply into the page. You notice something immediately. Certain entries are written over, traced twice, sometimes 3 times, as though the rewriter feared the words might vanish if not anchored firmly enough. The dates are ordinary. The coordinates are precise. Wind speed, wave height, crew health, all recorded with methodical care. And then, without warning, a phrase appears that makes you pause. Anchored at unfamiliar port. No exclamation mark, no flourish. Just those words, calm and restrained, like a man describing rain. You turn the page, expecting clarification, but instead you find more of the same. The port has a name. The name does not appear on any chart you know. The handwriting tightens slightly, the letters pressing closer together, as if the writer is conserving space or courage. You begin to sense a pattern. This is not one ship, not one voyage. The same strange ports appear across different oceans, recorded by captains who never met, flying different flags decades apart. How could men trained to distrust illusion calmly record harbours that history insists were never there? Were they lying? Were they mistaken? Or were they faithfully writing down something that later generations decided to forget? As you read, you notice a curious detail. Whenever these impossible ports are mentioned, the ink often changes tone just slightly. Sometimes it is heavier, as if the pen was pressed harder. Sometimes it looks freshly dark compared to surrounding lines, as though written later, at night, by lamplight, when the sea was quiet and doubt grew louder. You imagine the captain, pausing, listening to the creak of the hull, wondering whether to cross out the words, wondering who might read them one day. You're not rushing now. The rhythm of the sentences slows you. The sea outside the ship is calm in your mind, the stars steady overhead. And yet beneath that calm, a tension hums. Why do these logs never dwell on emotion? Why do they refuse drama even when describing the impossible? Perhaps because the writers feared that sounding excited would make the entries easier to dismiss. Perhaps they believed restraint was their only defense against disbelief. The ports themselves are described with frustrating simplicity. Stone quays, tall lights, deep harbour. No ornate language, no metaphors, just facts. But facts repeated often enough become questions. If these places were mirages, why do multiple ships describe unloading cargo? Why do they record repairs made, water taken on, supplies exchanged? You begin to feel that these ports were not fleeting visions. They behaved like functional infrastructure, like nodes in a system. And then there is the strangest detail of all. In the margins, written smaller, almost shyly, you see occasional symbols and names. Some are crossed out, some are underlined. A few appear again and again, unfamiliar words, sharp consonants, flowing curves. Later historians would label these marks Tartarian, though even that name feels like a placeholder, a label pasted over something older and more complex. At the time, the sailors simply wrote what they heard, what they were told, what they thought might help them remember. You begin to understand that this logbook is not trying to convince you of anything. It is not asking for belief. It is simply sitting there, patient, like the sea itself, allowing you to notice what others overlooked. Ink that refuses to dry, words that refuse to fade, ports that refuse to stay erased. As your breathing slows, you realize this is only the beginning. If the first pages already challenge what you think you know about maps and oceans, what will happen when you follow these ships farther from shore? What happens when navigation itself begins to fail? You close the logbook gently, not because you are finished, but because you feel the need to rest your mind before continuing. The sea will still be there when you open it again. The compass needle betrays you long before the sea does, and that quiet betrayal is what makes the logbook entries so unsettling. A storm can be forgiven, a reef can be mapped, but when a trusted instrument begins to hesitate, to tremble, to point everywhere and nowhere at once, the world itself feels subtly unstitched. You read the next set of entries and feel that slow unease spreading, like a tide creeping across sand. You're still standing at the captain's desk, but now the ship is farther from any familiar coast. The handwriting remains neat, disciplined, yet the language shifts. Bearings are recorded twice. Headings are corrected, then corrected again. Compass unreliable, one entry notes, almost apologetically. Another says, needle spins without cause. There is no accusation, no panic, just observation. And somehow that calm makes it worse. You imagine the moment it first happens. The sea is steady, the sky clear. Nothing suggests danger. The officer checks the compass out of the habit, expecting reassurance, and instead finds confusion. North slides away. East and west blur together. You picture a finger tapping the glass, a quiet frown, the instrument checked against another, then another. All disagree, as if the ship has slipped into a pocket of the world where direction is a suggestion, not a rule. The logs reveal that this is not rare. Again and again, before an impossible port is sighted, navigation becomes uncertain. Stars no longer align with calculations. The sun's angle feels wrong. Timekeeping falters by minutes, then by hours. You start to sense that these ports are not simply places on the sea, but places the sea itself bends around. As if approaching them requires passing through a zone where the rules soften. You drift through one particular entry written in a slightly heavier hand. The captain describes ordering the ship to hold course despite the compass's protest. The crew murmurs, sailors glance at the horizon more often than usual, and then, without warning, the needle settles. It points confidently, not north, but toward open water where no land is marked. The captain follows it. What choice does he have? Discipline demands trust in instruments even when they misbehave. As you read, you feel the rhythm of the voyage slow. Days stretch. Distance becomes hard to judge. The log notes that the sea feels thicker, an odd word that appears in more than one account. Thicker water, thicker air, as if the ship is pushing through something unseen. You wonder why later historians ignored such phrases. Were they too vague, too uncomfortable, or did they hint at something no one wanted to explore? Then comes the moment that repeats across ships and centuries. The compass needle stops spinning and locks into place, not gently but decisively, as if satisfied. Shortly after, land appears, not gradually, not as a distant smudge, but suddenly fully formed. A harbour where there should be nothing but horizon. You feel the strange logic of it. The compass does not lead to the port seems to stabilise the compass. You begin to ask yourself quiet questions. What if these instruments were not failing but responding? What if the needle was reacting to something beneath the sea, or within it? Magnetic anomalies are easy explanations, comfortable explanations, but the logs do not describe erratic pull alone. They describe intention, direction with purpose, a sense of being guided rather than lost. Some captains attempt to resist. You read of one who orders the ship turned away from the strange bearing, insisting on known routes. The compass fights him, swinging violently, refusing to settle. The crew grows uneasy, sleep becomes shallow. Arguments break out over trivial things. Finally exhausted, the captain yields. The ship turns, the needle calms instantly. Within hours, the impossible port appears ahead, lights already lit as if expecting them. You notice how often the word expecting appears. Lights visible before sunset. Harbour signal given without hail. Berth indicated by lantern. These are not passive landmarks. They interact. They respond. And always, the compass seems complicit, like a silent intermediary between ship and shore. As your eyes grow heavier, you realise that navigation, the proud science of empire and exploration, becomes fragile in these accounts. Charts fail, instruments falter, only the act of following, of surrendering certainty, seems to bring safe passage. It is a reversal of everything sailors are trained to believe. Control dissolves, trust becomes something else entirely. And somewhere in the margins, almost as an afterthought, you see those same symbols again. Tartarian marks, small annotations near compass readings, as if someone wanted to connect the strange behaviour of the needle with an older, half-remembered knowledge. No explanation is given. None is needed. The implication hangs in the air like mist. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on deck at night, the compass glowing faintly, the needle steady at last. Ahead, a dark shape interrupts the stars. Behind you, the known world fades. You are not lost. You are being led. But by whom? By what? And toward what purpose the logbook does not answer. It simply waits, patient as the sea, for you to turn the page when you are ready. The fog arrives like a thought you didn't invite, soft at first, then total, until the world narrows to the sound of water against wood and the slow breathing of men who can't see their own hands. You read the next cluster of entries and feel how often captains describe this same curtain, this same white course, white swallowing presence, appearing before an impossible port is found, as if the sea insists on blindfolding you before it shows you what it hides. You're on deck now in your mind because the writing makes it impossible to stay at the desk. The log says, visibility reduced to nothing. It says, fog dense, unnatural. It says, no wind, yet mist moves. And you can almost hear it, the hush that falls over a ship when every sailor realizes the horizon is gone. Not storm, not night, just blankness. The strange part is how consistent the details are across different voyages. The fog is described as warm even in cold seas, or cold even in tropical latitudes. It carries a faint metallic smell, it muffles voices, but amplifies certain sounds, bells, knocking, distant horns. You notice that the writers rarely speculate, they simply record. Yet the recordings themselves begin to feel like a code. One captain writes that the fog seems to hold shape, like a wall. Another notes that they sailed along its edge for hours, the boundary sharp as if cut with a knife. You imagine steering a ship beside a solid cloud, the crew staring into whiteness that looks almost structured. And then, as if the fog is deciding something, it opens. This is where the logs become eerily intimate. They begin to describe sound, not sight. A bell heard through the mist, slow and steady, like a harbour bell calling ships home. But the charts show open ocean, a horn that answers their own signal, but from a direction that makes no sense. A ripple of music, almost too faint to catch, like a lullaby played far away. You read one entry where the captain writes, heard church bells at second watch, church bells, not waves, not wind. Bells measured by watch time, as if he is trying to make the impossible ordinary. Another entry, crew reports voices in fog unintelligible. Another, sound of oars, though no boat seen. The repetition begins to build a pressure in you. If many crews hear bells, then bells exist. If bells exist, then something is there, something built, something waiting. And then you find the detail that makes your skin prickle, even as you grow sleepier. Several logs describe the fog as if it remembers. One ship enters it and hears nothing. Another enters and hears bells immediately, as if the fog recognizes the shape of their hull, the pattern of their sails, the language of their flag. A later voyage from a different nation enters and hears a different signal. 3 knocks, then a long tone, like a custom greeting. You begin to wonder, what if the fog is not weather at all? What if it is a veil, designed, a screen between the ordinary sea and the place behind it? Sailors of old spoke of sea smoke and phantom mists, but these accounts sound less like superstition and more like procedure. The fog arrives, the ship is guided, the port appears, like steps in a ritual. In one log, the captain orders a cannon fired into the fog, not in aggression, but in fear, to test if anything responds. The echo comes back wrong. The sound returns too slowly, then too quickly, as if distances inside the mist cannot be trusted. The crew falls silent. No one laughs. No one calls it foolishness. They simply lower their eyes and return to their tasks, as if they have learned there are some curtains you do not pull aside violently. You notice another pattern. Whenever the fog thickens, the crew's mood changes. Short tempers, strange dreams, men waking with salt on their lips though they slept below deck. A sense of being watched from the whiteness. Yet strangely, the logs also mention a calming effect when the bells begin. The bells comfort some sailors, while terrifying others. A lullaby for the obedient, a warning for the curious. You keep reading and the fog becomes almost a character, an old guardian, patient and precise. One ship tries to flee it, turning hard to starboard. but the fog follows, keeping pace, matching their movement as if it is attached to them. Another ship cuts its sails and waits. The fog drifts around them like a slow animal circling prey, then parts cleanly ahead, revealing a strip of clear water leading forward. And then, always then, the impossible port arrives. But in this section of the logs, you are not yet at the port. You are in the in-between, the corridor, the place where sailors lose the horizon and with it, the comfort of thinking they understand the world. The place where sound becomes your only compass. You imagine leaning over the rail at night. The fog glows faintly, not from moonlight, but from itself, as if lit from within by a dim underwater lantern. You hear the bell again, slow, certain, like a heartbeat of stone and metal, and you ask yourself a gentle question, the kind you can ask only when you're half asleep and half awake. If the fog is a memory, whose memory is it? The seas, the ports, or something older still, something that learned long ago how to hide in plain sight? In the margins you find a tiny note beside the word bells. 2 symbols, sharp angular marks the later reducers would call Tartarian. The captain does not explain them. He simply places them there like a man leaving a breadcrumb trail for someone who might one day follow. And you feel it now, the strange softness of this story. It is frightening, yes, but it is also slow, rhythmic, repetitive, like waves. Fog, bells, guidance, fog, bells, guidance. The pattern rocks you. You turn the page with care, as if the paper might tear from centuries of secrets. The first light is what unsettles you most, not because it is bright, but because it is deliberate. You read the next entries and realize that these ports are never discovered by daylight. They announce themselves at night, when the sea is supposed to be empty and honest. Again and again, the logs describe the same moment. Open ocean, clean horizon, and then lights. You are standing on deck as the fog thins, your eyes adjusting to darkness. Someone points, no one speaks at first. Ahead, far too low to be stars and far too steady to be fireflies, small points of light hover just above the waterline. Lanterns, the logs say, harbour lamps. Sometimes they are white, sometimes amber. Sometimes a pale blue that no header can quite name. The important thing is not their colour, but their arrangement. You notice how precise the descriptions are. 3 lights in a row. Twin lamps flanking darker gap. Arc of illumination like a crescent. These are not random glows. They form patterns sailors recognise instinctively, the language of safe entry. Even before land is visible, the crew knows what these lights mean. This is a harbour. This is permission. And yet the charts insist there is nothing here. You read one account where the lookout rubs his eyes, then checks again. The lights do not waver. Another sailor climbs the rigging for a better view. He reports the same thing. No landmass, no silhouette, just lights suspended over black water, as if the sea itself has learned to signal. The captain orders reduced speed. Anchors are readied. Protocol takes over, because confusion is easier to manage when you follow rules. What strikes you as you sink deeper into these pages is how calm the crews remain. There is surprise, yes, but not panic. It is as though some older instinct overrides disbelief. Harbour lights mean safety, harbour lights mean rest, and so the ships proceed. As they draw closer, the water changes. The logs mention reflections that do not match the waves. Light stretches too far, bends at wrong angles, as if reflecting off surfaces not yet visible. You imagine leaning over the rail, watching lantern glow ripple across water that feels suddenly deeper, heavier, more still. Then slowly the darkness behind the lights thickens and shapes begin to form. Land does not rise from the horizon. It condenses. One moment there is nothing, the next there are piers, stone quays, breakwaters extending into the sea like arms. The lights now make sense, fixed atop posts, arches, towers. You feel the quiet shock of it. A shoreline that appears whole, finished, not emerging but revealing itself, as if a curtain has been drawn aside. Multiple logs describe this same sensation. The certainty that the port was already there before anyone saw it. Not built in haste, not temporary, ancient, functional, confident. Some captains write that the architecture feels old but maintained, a strange pairing of words. Others say it feels out of time, as if it belongs equally to past and future. You notice another pattern. These ports are always calm. No waves break against the docks. No wind howls through rigging. Even when storms rage beyond the harbour mouth, Inside there is stillness. One log records lightning flashing far out at sea while the water at the quay remains smooth as glass. Protection, perhaps, or separation. As ships enter, signals answer them. Lanterns shift. Bells ring. Not loudly but clearly, marking approach, depth, alignment. The logs show that sailors understand these signals without being taught. Their bodies respond before their minds do. Adjust course, reduce sail, prepare lines. It is as if the port speaks a universal maritime language older than nations, and yet no flags fly. This detail repeats often. No banners, no emblems claiming ownership, just light, stone and silence. You find yourself wondering why that absence feels heavier than any symbol. A port without a flag is a port without a master, or a port beyond the need to declare one. You read of ships anchoring beside unfamiliar vessels already moored there. Ships of strange design, hulls too smooth, masts without rigging. Others described as old beyond recognition, their lines belonging to no known era. And yet none appear abandoned. They sit patiently as if waiting for crews who have simply stepped away for a moment. The lights continue to behave intelligently. When a ship hesitates, unsure where to berth, a lantern brightens briefly, drawing attention to an open quay. When the ship aligns correctly, the light dims again. This is not chance, this is guidance. You feel it deepening the unease and the wonder at the same time. One captain records ordering all lights aboard his own ship extinguished as an experiment. The harbour lights do not react. The port does not withdraw. Instead, a new light appears closer to the waterline, lower and softer, illuminating just enough space for the ship to continue safely. The captain writes nothing more about the test. He simply notes, "Harbour accommodates." As you read, your thoughts begin to slow. The repetition of light, approach, entry becomes hypnotic. Lights in darkness, darkness parting. Silence welcoming. It feels less like arrival and more like being allowed. You find a passage where a sailor writes of standing watch onto deck while moored. He stares at the harbour lights for hours and notices they never flicker. Oil lamps should waver. Flames should dance. These do not. They glow with steady patience, as if fed by something other than fuel. He writes, "Lights feel alive, but not hostile." A strange comfort settles over you as you read that line, like a whispered reassurance. In the margins, you see those symbols again. Tartarian marks beside sketches of lantern arrangements, small diagrams showing light positions and angles. This was knowledge being collected, not feared. A recognition that these ports followed rules, just not rules written in any known book. You begin to feel the soft pull of sleep now, as if the harbour lights themselves are guiding your thoughts toward rest. You understand why sailors trusted these places enough to dock, to disembark, to sleep. Light has always been humanity's promise against the dark, and here in the middle of nowhere light waits faithfully. As you turn the page, you realise something quietly profound. These impossible ports do not hide in darkness. They announce themselves. They choose visibility. The question that lingers, gentle and persistent, is why? Why offer light to passing ships? Why guide strangers safely in? And why does the sea, usually so indifferent, seem to cooperate? The lights do not answer. They simply continue to glow. The unsettling thing about this harbour is not that it exists, but that it refuses to stay where it was found. You read the next set of entries and feel a subtle shift in tone, as if the writers themselves are leaning closer to the page, lowering their voices even in ink. This is where certainty begins to loosen its grip, where sailors stop trusting yesterday to resemble today. You imagine waking at anchor after a calm, uneventful night. The ship creaks softly, lines taut, the smell of stone and still water lingering in the air. The port was real. You saw it. You touched the quay. You tied fast to iron rings set deep into ancient masonry. And yet when dawn arrives, something is wrong. The logs describe it plainly. Harbour absent at first light. Another writes, "Anchors hold, but shore gone." You feel the quiet shock of that moment. The ship is still moored. The ropes are still stretched outward, but they lead into empty water, pulled tight against nothing. Sailors lean over the rail, staring down at blue depths where stone should be. Some swear they can still feel vibration through the lines, as if they are tied to something just beyond sight. You notice how carefully the captains phrase these observations. No one writes "vanished." They write "no longer visible," as if they are unwilling to accuse reality itself of leaving. One captain orders a sounding taken beneath where the key should be. The lead line drops far deeper than expected, deeper than the charts for that region allow. It comes back cold. Another log describes cutting the lines in panic. The moment the ropes are severed, the ship lurches, not from wind or wave, but as if released from a grip. Sailors nearly fall. The captain records the sensation with a single word: unmoored. Not just untied, but unheld. Then there are the accounts that are even stranger. Some ships wake to find the harbour still present, but altered. Piers have shifted. Towers stand at different angles. A breakwater now curves where it was straight the night before. It is as though the port has moved, not across the sea, but within itself, like a living thing adjusting posture while no one is watching. You read one entry that chills you in its restraint. Port location inconsistent with previous bearings, the captain recalculates. He checks landmarks. He takes sun readings. According to every instrument, the ship has not moved, and yet the port is now miles away from where it should be. How does a harbour travel while the sea remains still? You begin to sense that these ports are not fixed points on the map. They are events, appearances, conditions that briefly allow ships to dock before withdrawing. The logs support this quietly. The ports are never reported by two ships at the same time unless they arrive together. They do not accumulate traffic. They do not grow crowded. They seem to host only those invited in that moment. This idea becomes heavier as you read of attempts to return. Captains mark coordinates carefully, promising to revisit the strange harbour with daylight and witnesses. They sail away, confident they can find it again. But when they return, nothing. Open water, no fogu, no lights, just sea, honest and empty. The logbooks record these failures without drama, but you feel the frustration between the lines. One captain writes of circling the supposed location for 3 days, scanning the horizon until his eyes ache. On the 4th day, the fog appears again, but somewhere else entirely. He follows it. The harbour reappears unchanged, serene as if amused by the effort to pin it down. You almost smile at the thought, though it unsettles you too. You notice how this mobility changes the way sailors speak about the ports. They stop calling them places. They use phrases like the harbour event or the occurrence. Language adapts when maps fail, and in the margins those Tartarian symbols appear more often, clustered near entries describing movement and disappearance, as if someone long ago understood that these ports obeyed different rules. As your breathing slows, you reflect on how comforting and frightening this idea is. A port that comes when needed, then leaves before it can be claimed. No conquest, no permanent occupation, only use, then release. It feels almost merciful or controlled, perhaps both. You imagine standing on deck at dawn, the sun rising over empty sea, the crew silent around you. No one laughs it off. No one calls it a dream. They all felt the stone beneath their boots. They all slept safely. The memory is shared, solid, undeniable, and yet there is nothing to point to now, nothing to prove it happened. The sea resumes its normal rhythm. Gulls cry, wind fills the sails, but something fundamental has shifted. The sailors have learned that not all harbours want to be remembered, and not all shelters are meant to stay. You turn the page slowly because you sense the story is deepening now. If the ports can move, then perhaps they are not just shelters, but something else entirely. Gateways, maybe, or checkpoints, or listening posts drifting quietly through the world's oceans, choosing when and where to appear. The logbook does not say, it never says, it only shows you what happened, then moves on like the port itself. The logbook grows quieter here, not because less is happening, but because the writers seem to sense they are being observed. You feel it immediately in the way sentences shorten, in how details are noted and then left hanging. This is the section where other people appear, not crews, not officers, but dock workers, and somehow that makes everything more unsettling. You imagine stepping off the ship for the first time, boots touching stone that feels warmer than it should. The quay is wide, clean, and worn smooth by centuries of use. The harbour smells faintly of mineral water and something sharp like ozone after a storm. And then you notice them. Figures moving along the docks calmly, efficiently, as if your arrival is routine. The logs describe them with care, but also with restraint. Human in form, one captain writes. Clothed plainly. Another adds, speech minimal. They do not rush, they do not stare. They gesture where cargo should be placed, where repairs may be made. Everything feels organised, practiced. Too practiced. You read how sailors instinctively look down as these dockworkers pass, and that is when the detail appears again and again, written almost reluctantly. No footprints, wet planks, damp stone, morning dew, yet nothing marks where these figures have walked. One sailor tests it, the log notes. He steps deliberately behind one of them, heel pressing firmly into moisture. His own print appears clearly, the other's does not. There is no panic recorded, just confusion and then acceptance. Sailors are practical people. If the dockworkers lift cargo, if they secure lines, if they bring fresh water and unfamiliar but nourishing food, then questions can wait. Survival has its own logic. Still, the absence lingers in the mind, like a word you almost remember. You read of hands exchanging goods without touch, a crate lifted and set down, but the sailor cannot recall feeling weight transferred. Another entry notes that ropes seem to tighten themselves once passed over a bollard, as if guided by invisible tension. The dockworkers' movements are described as smooth, economical, almost rehearsed. One captain records trying to speak to them directly. He offers a greeting in a common trade tongue. The figure inclines its head slightly, acknowledging the sound, but does not answer. Another sailor tries a different language. The same response, not refusal, not ignorance, simply no reply. Communication seems unnecessary here, as though roles are already understood. As you sink deeper into the story, you realize the logs rarely describe faces. Clothing, posture, height, yes. Faces, no. When mentioned at all, they are unremarkable or hard to recall. You feel a subtle chill at that. How can a face be hard to remember moments after seeing it, unless memory itself is being gently discouraged? One haunting entry describes a sailor staring directly at a dockworker's feet for several minutes, waiting, watching. The figure notices and pauses, then slowly steps backward into the shadow cast by a tower. When it re-emerges, the log says, the sailor can no longer remember why he was staring. The moment slips away, leaving only a vague discomfort. You begin to see why later editors might have dismissed these accounts. No violence, no monsters, just absences. And absences are easy to overlook, easy to explain away. But as you read them together, the pattern becomes undeniable. These dockworkers interact with the physical world selectively. They are present enough to function, but not enough to leave traces. In one port, rain begins to fall lightly. The logs describe sailors watching droplets strike stone, splash, run in thin streams toward the water. The dockworkers move through the rain unchanged. No wet cloth, no dripping hems. They pass between droplets like reflections rather than bodies, and yet they carry crates that leave real marks when set down. You feel your thoughts slowing, circling this contradiction. Present, but not impressed upon the world. Useful, but untethered. It makes you wonder whether these figures belong to the port, or whether the port itself produces them, like tools shaped temporarily into human form. The Tartarian symbols appear frequently here, written beside sketches of dock layouts and unloading procedures. You sense that someone, somewhere, understood these beings as part of a system, not citizens, not labourers, interfaces. The word is never written, but it floats in your mind like a half-remembered dream. You read of sailors sleeping unusually deeply while docked, as if the port encourages rest. Dreams become vivid, but hard to recall upon waking. One man swears he dreamed of walking the docks alone, watching the dockworkers dissolve into light as dawn approached. When he wakes, he cannot remember the dream's ending, only the feeling that he was not meant to follow them too closely. As dawn comes, the dockworkers simply stop appearing. No farewell, no signal. One moment they are there, coiling ropes, inspecting hulls. The next, the docks are empty. And again, no footprints. No evidence they were ever present at all. You sit with this section longer than the others because it feels intimate in a quiet way. Ports can be imagined, lights can be misjudged, fog can deceive, but helpers without traces challenge something deeper, your trust in cause and effect. You begin to sense that these ports are not just places ships visit. They are environments with rules that differ gently, almost politely from your own. Rules that allow interaction but discourage possession. Use without ownership, assistance without intimacy. As you turn the page, you feel a soft warning settle in your chest. Not sharp enough to alarm you, just enough to guide you. In this world behind the fog, things work, but they do not belong, and neither, perhaps, do those who stay too long. The maps are where certainty is supposed to live, and that is why this part of the logbook feels almost tender, like watching something trusted quietly betray its keeper. You move into the next pages and notice immediately that sketches begin to appear more often than words. Coastlines drawn in pencil, harbours outlined twice, notes added, erased, then added again. This is where sailors try to trap the impossible on paper. You imagine the captain seated late at night, lantern low, rolling gently with the ship. He spreads out his charts, places the new sketch beside the official map and frowns. The proportions are wrong, the angles don't match. He adjusts, redraws, measures again, still wrong. The port refuses to fit. The logs describe something deeply unsettling. The maps seem to change after being drawn. A harbour carefully sketched one evening appears distorted the next morning. Distances stretch. Breakwaters curve differently. A tower that was central now sits too far east. One captain writes, "Map disagrees with memory." Another writes, "Map disagrees with itself." You read of sailors comparing notes across voyages. Two ships dock at the same impossible port on different nights, weeks apart. Their maps should match. They do not. The harbour's outline shifts subtly between visits, like a living shoreline adjusting to tide, time, or observer. You begin to feel that the act of mapping itself is interfering, as if the port resists being flattened into symbols and scale. One entry stands out for its quiet frustration. The captain describes tracing the harbour walls repeatedly until the paper thins. He presses so hard the pencil nearly tears through. When he lifts the page to the light, he notices something chilling. Faint impressions beneath his drawing, older lines that do not match his own. As if the paper has been used before, long ago, to draw a similar place. You pause there, letting that idea settle. What if these maps are not being rewritten by the sailor but revealed? What if the paper remembers previous hands, previous attempts to capture the same thing? The thought feels strange but gentle, like discovering an old message written in invisible ink. You notice that ink behaves oddly in these sections. Lines bleed slightly, even on dry pages. Measurements smudge overnight. One officer records sealing his chart case tightly, only to find new markings inside the next day. Small symbols near the harbour sketch, identical to those Tartarian marks you've seen elsewhere. No one admits to adding them, no one is accused. The logs never say the maps are cursed, they never say the ports are alive. They simply show you what happens when rigid systems meet flexible realities. Latitude and longitude wobble, scale loses meaning, north becomes negotiable. You begin to sense that these ports exist in relation to ships, not to the globe. They are where they are needed, not where they are fixed. One crew tries an experiment. They copy the harbour map multiple times, each sailor drawing from memory rather than reference. When they compare the drawings, all are different, and yet all feel correct. Each captures a different emphasis. Depth, shelter, access, symmetry. It is as if the port presents itself differently depending on what the observer values. This realization slows your breathing further. It feels almost comforting, a place that adapts to perception rather than demanding obedience. A harbour that cannot be owned because it cannot be fully known. You understand why empires, with their hunger for permanence, would find such places intolerable. You read of an admiral ordering all such maps collected and standardized. The result is a single, clean chart that satisfies no one. Sailors complain it feels wrong. They cannot navigate by it. It leads to empty sea. The original sketches, messy and inconsistent, worked better. They guided ships more reliably than the official version ever could. In the margins, someone has written a quiet note beside a distorted coastline. Do not correct. You linger on that phrase, do not correct, as if correction itself is the mistake, as if the port is asking to be observed, not improved. By now your thoughts feel like waves smoothing rough edges. You are less concerned with proving anything and more content to drift with the pattern. Fog, lights, dock workers, now maps that refuse to stay still. Each element feels like part of a larger design, one that favours relationship over control. As you turn the page, you sense the story moving inward. From instruments to sights to people to representations, the closer humans try to grasp these ports, the more gently they slip away, not in anger, not in fear, just with patient inevitability. You rest your mind there, in that softness, and prepare to follow the logs into something deeper still, sound, language, and the sea's own way of speaking. The sea begins to speak here, not in waves or wind, but in patterns of sound that feel deliberate, almost conversational. You sense it as soon as you read the first lines of this section. The language in the logbooks changes again, growing rhythmic, repetitive, as if the writers are unconsciously mirroring what they hear. This is where sound becomes more important than sight. You imagine yourself on deck at night, the harbour behind you quiet, the water dark and perfectly still. Then it begins. A low tone rises from beneath the hull, not loud enough to alarm, just deep enough to feel in your chest. The logs call it many things: horn, call, vibration, knock. None of the words fully satisfy. You read that these sounds follow structure. 3 short pulses, 1 long, a pause, then a response from somewhere else along the quay, slightly higher Syrian pitch. The crew listens without speaking, instinctively aware that interruption would be rude, perhaps even dangerous. The exchange continues, back and forth, echoing across water that carries sound unusually well. You notice how often sailors describe the sounds as older than language. They do not feel like signals invented by humans. They feel discovered, like something always present, waiting to be used. One officer writes, "Sound behaves like depth." Another writes, "Hearing extends farther than sight." You let those phrases roll gently through your mind. In several logs, captains note that ships arriving without making any signal are still answered. The harbour calls first, a deep tone from the water, felt before it is heard like a question. The ship responds unintentionally, creaking hull, clinking chains, the soft sigh of canvas, and the harbour seems satisfied. Lights adjust, access is granted. You begin to understand that this port does not rely on flags or spoken words. It listens to vibration, rhythm, presence. You wonder if that is why the dockworkers do not speak. Perhaps speech is unnecessary here, even disruptive. Sound is used sparingly, precisely, the way bells are rung in careful intervals. One particularly haunting entry describes a sailor lowering a bucket over the side, while the harbour tones are active. As the bucket touches water, the sound shifts. The pitch changes slightly, as if acknowledging contact. The sailor lifts the bucket quickly, startled, and the tone fades. No harm, no warning, just reaction. You read of captains attempting to imitate the sounds deliberately. Some use horns, some strike metal, some beat drums. The results are inconsistent. Sometimes the harbour responds favourably, lights brightening, access easing. Other times, nothing happens at all. One log records that imitating the wrong pattern causes the sound to stop entirely, plunging the harbour into an unnerving silence that lasts until dawn. You feel the weight of that silence even as you grow drowsier. Silence here is not absence. It is refusal, a turning away, and the sailors seem to sense this instinctively. They stop experimenting, they listen instead. The Tartarian symbols appear densely in this section, clustered around transcriptions of sound patterns. Lines, dots, curves, notations that resemble both music and writing. You realize that someone was trying to record not just what was heard, but how it felt. A language of vibration rather than words. One entry mentions an old sailor who claims he has heard similar sounds before, far inland, near ancient stone structures that hum in strong winds. The captain records this without comment, but you feel the implication stretching outward, connecting sea and land, harbour and ruin, port and forgotten city. As the sounds continue night after night, the crew's sleep changes. Dreams align. Men report hearing the same tones in their rest, synchronized, as if the harbour's rhythm is gently entraining their minds. No nightmares, just depth. One sailor writes that he slept as if underwater, heavy and peaceful. You notice how carefully the logs avoid labelling this as magic or threat. There is respect here, a sense that the port communicates on a frequency humans are only partly equipped to perceive. Too much analysis feels intrusive. Better to listen and accept. As dawn approaches, the sounds fade naturally, not cutting off but resolving like a chord reaching rest. The harbour grows quiet. The sea resumes its usual voice. Gulls cry, ropes creak. The world feels ordinary again, and yet something lingers in your body. A faint echo of resonance. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it would be like to understand that language fully. To hear the sea not as noise but as instruction. To dock not by sight but by harmony. The thought is oddly soothing. When you open them again, you turn the page, knowing the logs will soon take you beyond sound and into structure, into the city itself, waiting patiently behind its breakwaters. The stone appears where stone should never be, and that is what makes it feel so heavy in your thoughts. You move into the next entries and sense the writers slowing themselves down, choosing words carefully, as if the architecture itself demands respect. This is the moment when sailors pass fully beyond the quay and glimpse what lies behind it. You imagine walking along the inner edge of the harbour, lantern light behind you, and then you see it. A breakwater not of piled rock or timber, but of shaped stone fitted so precisely that seams nearly vanish. It curves gently, deliberately, shielding the harbour like a massive arm. The logs emphasise its scale, too large for a temporary port, too refined for an improvised one. You read how sailors run their hands along the surface and feel no sharp edges, no loose mortar. The stone is warm, even at night. One entry notes faint vibration beneath the palm, not movement, just presence, like standing near a deep engine idling far below. Another sailor swears the stone hums when the harbour sounds begin, as if the entire structure participates in the same language. Beyond the breakwater, the city reveals itself slowly, not all at once. The logs describe narrow openings leading inward, corridors of stone that widen gradually, guiding movement without walls or gates. Towers hides behind them, tall and slender, their silhouettes unfamiliar yet strangely logical, like geometry you recognise without remembering where you learned it. You notice that the sailors never describe decay, no crumbling, no ruin. Everything feels maintained, but not freshly built. Time here feels paused. One captain writes, "Architecture suggests great age without age's damage." You linger on that phrase, letting it settle. The buildings do not crowd the water. Space is generous, walkways are broad, sightlines are clear. The city seems designed for flow rather than defence. No battlements, no cannon ports, no signs of militarisation. This absence feels louder than any fortress. A city that does not expect attack suggests a confidence that borders on indifference. You read of sailors standing in open plazas just beyond the quay, staring upward. The stone towers are etched with shallow grooves and symbols that catch light at certain angles. Not decoration exactly, more like interfaces, responding subtly to sound and movement. When a bell rings in the harbour, faint lines glow briefly along the stone, then fade. Again those Tartarian marks appear in the margins, this time beside sketches of arches and columns. The sailors do not call the style foreign. They call it complete, as if it belongs to a system finished long ago, not an experiment in progress. And you feel your breathing deepen as the descriptions continue. Water channels run through the city, not as open canals but as covered flows beneath translucent stone. Light filters up from below, giving the ground a soft inner glow. One sailor kneels to touch it and feels gentle warmth, like sun-heated rock, though no sun has touched it. The city is quiet, not empty, but hushed. Footsteps echo differently here, absorbed rather than reflected. Voices feel intrusive. Sailors lower their tones without being told to. They sense instinctively that this is not a place for shouting or command. You read of a captain attempting to count buildings, to estimate population. He gives up. The city does not organise itself into neat grids or clusters. Structures align according to curves and angles that resist counting. Measurement slips away again, just as it did with maps. One log records a strange moment. A sailor swears he sees the city extend farther inland than it should physically allow, as if depth stretches behind the visible structures. Another sailor standing beside him sees nothing unusual. Both are sober. Neither argues. They simply record their perceptions side by side, allowing contradiction to coexist. You realise this is becoming a theme. The port does not enforce a single reality. It allows variation. Observation does not collapse possibility here. It multiplies it, and that makes the place feel less like a city built for humans, and more like a city willing to host them temporarily. As you sink deeper into the descriptions, a soft reverence fills the writing. The sailors are no longer merely recording, they are witnessing. There is gratitude in their words, even if they do not say it outright. Gratitude for shelter, for order, for a glimpse of something that does not demand allegiance. You pause on one final image from this section. A sailor stands at the edge of the inner city just before dawn. He looks back toward his ship, then forward toward stone corridors fading into shadow. For a moment, he feels certain that if he takes one more step, he will not be able to return, not because he is forbidden, but because he will forget why he wanted to. He turns back. The city does not react. It does not close or punish. It simply remains, patient and vast, waiting for the next ship that needs it. You turn the page slowly, aware that you are being guided deeper still, not just into architecture, but into names, labels, and the quiet moment when sailors try to explain what they have seen. The names appear quietly, almost shyly, tucked into narrow columns of the logbooks where cargo tallies and weather notes usually live. You might miss them if you weren't already listening closely. This is where the word Tartarian begins to surface, not shouted, not emphasized, but repeated often enough to feel intentional. You imagine a captain pausing with his pen, considering what to write. He has seen the port, he has walked its stone, he has heard its sounds and watched its lights respond. Now he must label it, because humans label what they fear forgetting. And so, beside the port's unfamiliar name, often hard to pronounce, sometimes written phonetically, he adds a note, known to some as Tartarian, or simply Tart. The logs never explain the word. They treat it as something already half known, circulating quietly among sailors long before it ever reached scholars. You sense that this name travels by whisper rather than decree, passed from crew to crew in low voices, late at night, when charts are rolled away and the sea is calm enough to invite honesty. You notice how the word appears differently depending on the writer. Some underline it, some abbreviate it, some mark it with a small symbol beside it, the same angular notation you've seen so often now. It is never defined, only referenced, like a shared understanding no one wants to formalize too strongly. One log records a brief exchange between officers. The captain asks where the harbour might be marked on older charts. The navigator hesitates, then replies, "Old Tartarian routes, sir." Nothing more is said. No clarification requested. The conversation moves on. You feel the weight of that silence, knowledge acknowledged, then deliberately left untouched. As you read deeper, you realize Tartaria here is not described as a nation in the familiar sense. There are no borders, no rulers named, no armies mentioned. Instead, the word seems to function like a category, a designation for things that do not belong neatly to modern powers. Tartarian ports, Tartarian symbols, Tartarian methods, as if it describes a mode of existence rather than a territory. You begin to notice patterns. Whenever the Tartarian label appears, the tone of the log changes subtly. The writing grows more careful, more respectful, almost relieved. One captain writes, "Port operated under Tartarian order." Another notes, "Facilities consistent with Tartarian construction." These phrases feel less like discoveries and more like recognitions. It dawns on you that some sailors expected these ports to exist. You read an account of a ship's carpenter who recognizes the stonework immediately. He has never seen it at sea, but he has seen ruins inland that use the same proportions, the same joining techniques. He says nothing more, but later that night, the captain adds a small Tartarian mark beside the harbour sketch. No explanation, just acknowledgement. The name spreads through the logs not as rumour, but as classification. When something behaves predictably, reliably, beyond known systems, it becomes Tartarian. When it offers infrastructure without demanding loyalty, Tartarian. When it cannot be conquered, charted or owned, but can be used briefly and safely, Tartarian. You feel the lullaby rhythm deepen here. The repetition of the words soothes rather than alarms. Tartarian ports are not portrayed as threats. They are portrayed as old solutions to problems modern sailors barely remember how to ask. Shelter without control, order without authority, technology without spectacle. One particularly gentle entry records a young officer asking his captain what Tartaria is. The captain pauses, then answers, "Something that still works." And that is all. The officer does not press further. Neither do you. You notice too that when Tartarian labels appear, official scrutiny fades. Ships that mention the word seem less likely to be questioned later. Reports are filed. Logs are archived. No follow-up, no investigation. It is as if the name itself discourages curiosity at higher levels, like a quiet agreement not to disturb certain layers of history. You wonder how many other things were once Tartarian before being renamed, absorbed, or erased. How many roads, canal, or canals, buildings, and systems might have belonged to the same unseen network. The thought drifts through you slowly, without urgency, like a tide moving under sleep. As the section draws on, you realize this is a turning point. The logs are no longer just recording phenomena. They are placing those phenomena into a lineage, a continuity. The impossible ports are not anomalies. They are survivors. You imagine the sea dotted not randomly, but intentionally, with these quiet nodes of shelter and exchange, a maritime web older than empires, still functioning beneath them, unnoticed unless needed. Tartaria not as a lost empire, but as an enduring architecture of the world. The page ends with a simple note beside a list of supplies taken on at one such port. Payment rendered per Tartarian custom. No currency listed, no value assigned, just custom. You feel the soft pull of that idea as you close the page. Trade without money, order without rule, ports without ownership. The story is no longer about strange sightings. It is about an alternative way the world might still be running quietly beneath the one you were taught to see. You turn the page, ready to follow the logs into what was exchanged in these places, and what kind of technology made such calm impossibilities possible. The cargo lists change here, and you notice it before the logs tell you why. The columns remain neat, the handwriting disciplined, but the words themselves feel unfamiliar, like objects described by someone reaching for the language that doesn't quite exist yet. This is where trade enters the story, not as commerce alone, but as quiet evidence of a different technological order. You imagine crates being opened on deck under low lantern light. Inside are materials that do not behave the way sailors expect. Metals that are light enough to lift with one hand yet ring like solid stone when struck. Sheets of reflective substance thinner than glass but unbreakable under pressure. Coils wound so precisely they hum faintly, even when untouched, as if remembering motion. The logs never call these things miraculous. They call them unusual, efficient, remarkable for weight. Sailors are practical observers. They test, they tap, they measure, and then they write down what refuses to fit old categories. One entry describes a repair made to a cracked mast band using a Tartarian alloy provided by the port. The band weighs half as much as iron, yet holds under strain without flexing. The carpenter records this fact, then adds quietly, "No corrosion observed after immersion." Weeks later, another note confirms it still hasn't rusted. No explanation offered, just observation. You notice how often the word glass appears, paired with uncertainty. Glass that bends light strangely, glass that warms in the hand, glass that seems opaque until touched, then clears gradually, like breath fading from a mirror. One sailor swears a pane dimmed when he felt anxious, then brightened when he calmed. The captain does not comment on that claim, but he does not strike it out either. Energy appears in these logs without being named as such. Coils used to lift heavy loads with minimal effort. Plates installed beneath decks that reduce vibration and fatigue. Lamps that burn without fuel, glowing steadily through the night without smoke or heat. The sailors note how restful the harbour feels, how sleep comes easily, how aches fade more quickly. Cause and effect are never linked explicitly, but you feel the connection forming. You read of merchants, though none are described directly. Goods appear, goods are exchanged. No haggling, no scales. The logs mention equivalence, not price. One captain writes, "Exchange conducted to mutual balance." Another writes, "Value determined by need, not quantity." These phrases linger in you, gentle but disruptive. You realize that whatever technology underpins these ports is not designed for expansion or domination. It is designed for maintenance, for balance, for keeping systems running smoothly without drawing attention. A technology that solves problems quietly is easy to overlook in a world that celebrates spectacle. The Tartarian marks become more complex here, drawn near diagrams of coils and layered materials. You sense that some sailors understood these objects not as isolated tools, but as parts of a unified system: architecture, energy, sound, and material all tuned to one another. Nothing excessive, nothing wasted. One haunting log entry describes a sailor attempting to remove a Tartarian device from the port without permission. The object becomes inert the moment it crosses the harbour threshold. No shock, no punishment. It simply stops functioning, becoming dull, heavy, ordinary. The sailor returns it in embarrassment. The device resumes its gentle hum immediately upon replacement. The port accepts it back without comment. You feel the meaning of that action settle slowly. These technologies are not portable in the way modern tools are. They belong to context, to environment, to relationship. Move them from the system, and they become nothing special at all. As the nights pass in these accounts, you sense the crews growing quieter, calmer. Arguments lessen. Accidents decrease. Sailors report a strange clarity of thought, as if the constant background tension of life at sea has eased. The logs do not celebrate this, they simply note it, like good weather. You begin to suspect that the greatest Tartarian technology is not metal or glass, but atmosphere. A way of shaping human behavior gently, without commands. No rules posted, no enforcement needed. Just an environment that encourages balance by making imbalance uncomfortable. When ships depart, they do not carry much away. A few materials, some repairs, some water, sometimes a device that continues to function only while near the port, slowly fading as distance increases. The logs record this fading with surprising tenderness, like watching a firefly dim at dawn. As you read, your thoughts slow further. The idea forms without urgency. What if these ports were never meant to advance civilization but to preserve it? To offer periodic correction. To remind travellers of another way things can work. The cargo lists end for this section with a simple line repeated across multiple logs. Departed in balance. No profit noted. No loss calculated. Just balance. You turn the page gently, aware that the story is shifting again, away from objects and toward rules, rituals, and the strange authority that governs these places without ever revealing itself. Authority is usually loud. It announces itself with flags, uniforms, seals, and threats. That is why what you encounter next in the logs feels so unsettlingly soft. This is the section where rules appear. Real rules, enforced rules, but without any visible ruler to claim them. You imagine standing on the quay again, watching cargo move, repairs complete themselves, lights adjust, sounds answer sounds, everything functions smoothly, and yet nothing feels chaotic. That is when you begin to notice it. Ships follow procedures here that no one has explained out loud, and no one seems confused about them. The logs describe customs being observed automatically. Ships wait before entering, even when the harbour is empty. Crews disembark in a certain order. Tools are placed in specific locations. Waste is never thrown into the water. One captain writes, "Crew complied without instruction." Another notes, "Rules felt obvious upon arrival." You feel a slow curiosity grow. How can rules be obvious if no one teaches them? One entry explains that a sailor attempted to step beyond a marked stone threshold while carrying cargo meant for the ship. He did not receive a warning. He did not hear a command. He simply felt a sudden, overwhelming reluctance, like forgetting why he was walking at all. He stopped, confused, then turned back. The feeling passed instantly. The captain records this without embellishment, then adds, "Boundary respected." There are no guards, no chain, no machines, no gates. Yet boundaries exist, and they are never crossed accidentally. You read of tolls being paid, though no collector appears. Certain goods are left at designated points on the dock. Later, other goods appear in return. The exchange is precise. When a captain attempts to leave additional items as a gesture of gratitude, they remain untouched. The logs note, "Excess, not accepted." This idea repeats often: no excess, no accumulation, no hoarding. The port takes what is needed and nothing more. It gives what is required and nothing extra. You begin to sense that this is not morality enforced by punishment, but equilibrium maintained by design. One particularly striking entry describes a disagreement between two sailors that begins to escalate into violence. Raised voices echo briefly between the stone walls. Then something changes. The harbour sounds shift pitch slightly. The men grow quiet, not out of fear, but out of sudden exhaustion. Their anger drains away, leaving confusion and embarrassment behind. The captain writes, "Conflict dissolved." You linger on that phrase. Conflict dissolved, not suppressed, not punished, simply made unsustainable. As you read on, you realize these ports do not tolerate domination, not by outsiders, and not among those within. Hierarchies still exist aboard ship, orders are still given, but within the port, authority seems to flatten. Rank matters less, cooperation matters more. Sailors notice this but do not resist it. They adapt, as humans often do when resistance feels pointless. You find entries noting that weapons are never drawn here, not because they are confiscated, but because the impulse to use them fades. One captain writes, "Guns felt irrelevant." Another adds, "Threat did not occur to us." You feel the quiet weight of that realization settle into your chest. And yet this is not a place without enforcement. When rules are broken deliberately, the response is immediate and impersonal. A sailor who attempts to damage part of the harbour's stone finds his tools growing impossibly heavy, useless. Another who tries to conceal the goods meant for exchange experiences sudden dizziness and confusion until the items are returned. No injury, no accusation, just correction. You notice how often captains compare this to customs houses of powerful empires, and how different it feels. There are no interrogations, no inspections, no suspicion. The port does not ask who you are or where you come from. It only responds to what you do. The Tartarian symbols appear again here, drawn beside diagrams of thresholds, dock layouts, and movement patterns. You sense that these customs are ancient, refined over time not to control people, but to guide behaviour gently, like riverbanks guiding water. As your breathing slows, you reflect on how unfamiliar this kind of authority feels. An authority that does not need to be seen to be obeyed. An authority that does not demand belief, only participation. You begin to understand why no kingdom claims these ports. Ownership would be meaningless here. One final entry in this section stands out for its simplicity. A captain writes, "No king present, order present." He does not elaborate. He does not need to. You close your eyes briefly and imagine a world where systems function without rulers shouting from above, where balance is maintained not by fear, but by environment. The thought is strangely calming, like imagining gravity deciding not to argue with falling objects. When you open your eyes again, you turn the page, aware that the logs are about to grow stranger still. Because when authority is invisible, time itself sometimes begins to misbehave. Time loosens its grip here, not dramatically, not with alarms or sudden leaps, but with small polite inconsistencies that slip past you until you realize they have accumulated into something impossible. You sense it immediately as you read these pages. The handwriting is steady, but the dates begin to feel uncertain, as if this are being placed out of habit rather than confidence. You imagine a ship docked peacefully at the quay, the harbour quiet, the crew resting more deeply than they have in weeks. The captain notes the hour before turning in, the bell marks the watch. Everything feels normal. And yet, when morning comes, the log records something that makes you pause. Awoke to find provisions aged. Bread stales too quickly, fruit ripens overnight, then remains perfect for days. Wounds heal faster than expected. Beards grow unevenly, as if time has flowed around faces differently. You read entry after entry describing similar distortions. A sailor swears he stood watch for only a few minutes, yet the next bell rings as if hours have passed. Another insists the night felt endless, filled with long, gentle dreams, but the log shows barely an hour elapsed. No one argues, they simply record their own experience and move on. The most unsettling detail is how consistent these slips are across different ships. Time does not behave randomly here. It stretches and compresses in ways that seem tied to rest, repair and recovery, long enough to heal, short enough not to disrupt departure, as if the port itself regulates duration according to need rather than clock. You read of captains comparing chronometers before and after docking. Instruments disagree by minutes, sometimes hours. Yet once the ship leaves the harbour, the differences stop increasing. Time resumes its familiar rhythm, leaving only the discrepancy behind like a faint scar. One log records a ship that remains docked 3 nights by our reckoning, yet arrives at its next destination earlier than expected, with favourable tides that should not have aligned. The captain does not celebrate this. He simply notes, "Transit benefited." Another writes, "Time debt unclear." You feel the careful neutrality in these phrases, the refusal to speculate too loudly. Dreams become important here. Sailors report dreaming together, sharing images they later recognize in one another's descriptions. Long corridors of stone, slow-moving light beneath water, bells that ring without sound. They wake rested, but with the sense that something has passed through them gently, leaving them altered in ways they cannot name. You notice that fear does not dominate these accounts. Confusion, yes. Wonder, yes, but not panic. Time misbehaving is disturbing only when it threatens loss. Here it seems to give back more than it takes. The port does not steal years, it lends moments. One particularly quiet entry describes a sailor carving a mark into the quay to test whether time affects stone differently. When he returns the next night, the mark is gone, not worn away, simply absent. The stone is smooth, unbroken, as if the action never occurred. The sailor feels no anger, only a strange relief, like having a mistake gently undone. The Tartarian symbols cluster thickly here, drawn beside altered dates and watch records. You sense that time, like sound and structure, is part of the same integrated system. Not a river flowing forward blindly, but a resource managed carefully, released only as needed. As your thoughts soften, you consider the implication quietly forming in you. What if these ports are not just shelters in space, but shelters in time? Places where the relentless pressure of forward motion eases briefly, allowing bodies and minds to reset before returning to the current. You imagine standing on deck at dawn, the harbour still and silent, feeling rested beyond reason. The sun rises exactly where it should, the sea behaves normally again, and yet something in you knows you have been granted more than a night's rest, something precious returned without ceremony. The log ends this section with a line that feels almost like gratitude. Time here is kind. No further explanation, none required. You turn the page slowly, aware that if time can bend gently, then memory might not be as solid as you hope. And the logs are about to show you how that too begins to slip. The storms arrive with purpose, not fury, and that distinction is what makes them so unsettling. You feel it as soon as you read the next entries. The sea, which has been calm and accommodating, suddenly becomes selective. Not hostile, selective. As if something ancient has decided who may linger and who must move on. You imagine standing on deck as the first signs appear. The sky darkens unevenly, not in a wide front, but in a narrow arc that mirrors the harbour's mouth. Clouds gather low and fast, stacking themselves with strange precision. The wind rises, but only from one direction, pushing consistently away from the port rather than toward it. The logs describe this again and again. Storms that do not chase ships at sea, but wait at thresholds. Squalls that form suddenly just beyond the breakwater, violent enough to discourage exploration, yet carefully contained so as not to damage the harbour itself. One captain writes, "Weather hostile only outward." Another notes, "Harbour remains untouched." You feel the pattern forming. These storms are not accidents, they are boundaries. You read of a ship attempting to linger beyond the usual window of departure. Repairs complete, cargo exchanged, crew rested, yet the captain delays, hoping to study the port further, to map more, to understand. That night, the wind begins. Not a full gale, but a steady pressure that strains lines and rattles rigging. The harbour lights dim slightly, not in warning, but in withdrawal. By morning, waves crash violently just beyond the harbour mouth, though inside remains calm as a pond. The message is clear, though no one speaks it aloud. Time to go. You notice how the logs avoid calling this punishment. No ship is harmed while obeying the cue. Those that depart promptly find smooth passage once clear of the harbour's influence. The storm does not pursue. It dissipates as suddenly as it formed, leaving open sea behind, honest and navigable. But then there are the other accounts, the ones written in tighter script. One captain describes ordering his ship to push outward despite the growing storm, attempting to circle back toward the harbour from another angle. The result is immediate confusion. Wind shifts unpredictably, waves cross at odd angles. The compass falters again, spinning as it did before the port first appeared. The sea becomes unreadable, the crew grows uneasy, sleep becomes impossible. The storm does not intensify, but it does not relent either. It simply holds the ship in place, exhausting men and materials alike. After 2 days of this limbo, the captain orders a full retreat away from the harbour's last known position. The moment the course is set outward, the wind eases, the sea calms, the storm dissolves like breath on glass. The log records this without anger, only resignation. Approach denied. You sense something important here. These storms do not defend territory in the human sense. They do not protect borders. They protect balance. They prevent curiosity from hardening into conquest. Exploration is allowed. Occupation is not. You read of another ship attempting to anchor outside the harbour to wait out the storm, hoping the port might reappear once conditions improve. The anchor refuses to set, dragging uselessly across the seabed. Soundings reveal strange inconsistencies in depth, as if the sea itself refuses to provide purchase. Eventually, the crew gives up and sails on. The storm fades behind them. As your breathing slows, you realize these storms are doing something subtle. They are enforcing forgetting. They ensure ships do not linger long enough to gather too much certainty. They preserve mystery not by hiding, but by encouraging movement. One particularly poetic entry describes watching the storm from within the harbour at night. Lightning flashes far beyond the breakwater, illuminating waves that rise and collapse without ever reaching the inner waters. The stone remains dry, the light steady. The city behind the quay sleeps undisturbed. The sailor writes, "Storm feels like a wall." You pause there, letting that image rock gently in your mind. A wall made not of stone but of weather, flexible, responsive, temporary. A wall that does not imprison, only guides. The Tartarian symbols appear here again, drawn beside sketches of wind direction and cloud patterns. Someone has marked the storm's edge carefully, noting how it conforms to invisible lines radiating from the harbour. You sense that this too is part of the system. Sound, stone, light, time, and now weather, all cooperating quietly. You begin to feel a soft admiration forming, not excitement, not fear, but respect. These ports do not need armies. They do not need threats. They use the world itself as their language. Wind says no, calm says yes, storm says enough. As night deepens in these accounts, sailors report feeling strangely protected while within the harbour. Even as chaos rages beyond, sleep remains deep, dreams remain gentle. It is as if the storm is not meant to frighten those inside, but to remind them that the outside world still exists, still demands attention. You read of captains who learn to recognise the signs early. A shift in wind tone, a change in the harbour's sound, a subtle dimming of light. They do not argue, they prepare to leave, and those who do so find that the sea almost assists them, currents aligning helpfully once the decision is made. The section ends with a simple observation written by more than one hand across decades. The port releases you. Not expels, not drives away, releases. You sit with that word as you turn the page. Released implies care, timing, and understanding that holding on too long can be as harmful as pushing away. The ports do not trap ships. They send them back into the world when the moment is right. And as you prepare to read on, you sense the log shifting again, away from natural forces and towards something more intimate, more unsettling. Because if storms can guard the entrance, then something else must guard the mind itself. The change begins quietly, so quietly that at first you wonder if you are imagining it. You read the next entries and notice how often captains stop describing the harbour itself and start describing their crews. Not injuries, not illness, something softer, harder to measure. This is where the logs begin to watch the mind. You imagine the ship still moored, the harbour calm, the city behind the quay silent and orderly. Everything appears perfect, and yet sailors begin to forget small things. A man misplaces his knife 3 times in one day. Another cannot remember the name of the port they are in, even though he wrote it himself the night before. These are not alarming incidents on their own. Fatigue explains much at sea, but the pattern grows. You read how captains note these changes carefully, without accusation. Crew distracted. Attention drifts. Conversation circular. Men repeat the same questions. Stories are told twice, then 3 times, each retelling slightly altered. No one seems distressed by this. That is what unsettles you most. One entry describes a sailor who swears he spent the morning repairing a section of rigging, only to discover the work already completed when he returns. Another insists he has not left the ship all day, yet his boots are dusted with pale stone powder matching the quay. The captain records both statements side by side. No judgment, just record. Sleep deepens further. Sailors struggle to wake on schedule. Dreams linger into waking hours, blurring with memory. Some men wake convinced they have already departed the port, only to find themselves still moored. The lights unchanged. Others believe they have been there for weeks when the log shows only 2 nights have passed. You feel the gentle unease in the writing now. Not fear, concern. The captains begin to shorten stays deliberately, even when no storm presses them to leave. They sense something delicate is happening, something that does not harm directly but could dissolve something essential if allowed to continue. One particularly revealing entry describes a crew argument that spirals into confusion rather than anger. 2 sailors argue over a task neither can clearly remember assigning. Their voices rise, then falter. Mid-sentence, both men stop, blinking, suddenly unsure why they are speaking at all. The disagreement evaporates, leaving only embarrassment and silence. You begin to understand what the logs are hinting at. The port does not tolerate domination or conflict, but it also does not encourage prolonged identity. The longer one stays, the softer the boundaries of self become. Memory loosens, intent blurs, desire fades. The word quarantine never appears in the logs, but the concept does. Several captains write variations of the same line, prolonged stay not advised. Another writes, harbour encourages forgetting of outward purpose, and you let that phrase settle. Forgetting of outward purpose, as if the port gently asks, again and again, why you are here at all. You read of a navigator who begins to redraw the same map repeatedly, convinced it is nearly correct each time. When asked what he is mapping, he cannot answer clearly. He knows it's important. He feels urgency. But the object of that urgency slips away the moment he tries to explain it. In another log, a young sailor asks permission to remain behind when the ship departs. Not out of rebellion, not out of devotion. He simply feels tired of wanting things. The captain denies the request gently but firmly, ordering the sailor to rest instead. By morning, the desire has faded. The sailor boards without protest, unable to recall why he wished to stay. You notice how often captains intervene not with force, but with movement. They order drills, they send men back to the ship, they prepare for departure earlier than planned. Motion seems to restore clarity. Distance brings definition back to thought. The Tartarian symbols appear here again, drawn beside notes about memory and duration. One symbol repeats often, always near phrases describing confusion that resolves after departure. You sense it might mark a limit, a threshold not of space but of mind. One log includes a rare moment of direct reflection. The captain writes, "Port does not erase thought, it softens it." He adds later, "Soft things lose shape if held too long." You feel the quiet wisdom in those lines, the acceptance that not all dangers arrive with teeth. As you grow sleepier, you begin to see the elegance of it. A port that cannot be conquered because conquerors lose the hunger to conquer. A place where ambition dissolves into rest, where identity loosens into quiet presence. Stay too long, and you might forget why you ever wanted to leave, or why you wanted to arrive. This is not cruelty, it feels more like a safeguard. A way to ensure these ports remain transient, visited only briefly, never occupied. The mind itself becomes the gatekeeper, gently turning people away by easing their grip on desire and memory. You read of ships that ignore these signs, that linger out of fascination or greed. Their logs grow disordered. Dates slip. Entries repeat. Handwriting changes mid-sentence. Eventually, the records stop altogether, pages left blank. Later, those ships are found drifting, intact, provisioned, but silent. That thought lingers with you, heavy but calm. Not a threat, a consequence. The final line of this section is written in careful, almost tender script. Best to leave while you still wish to. No explanation follows. You sit with that advice as you turn the page. Because if the mind itself can be gently quarantined, then what happens when a ship leaves too late? What happens when the harbour lets go, but the crew cannot? The ships return without their people, and that is how you know something has gone irreversibly wrong. You feel the shift immediately in the logbooks. The tone grows sparse, factual, almost clinical. This is where emotion disappears entirely, as if the writers are afraid that feeling too much might invite the same fate. You imagine the first sighting, a familiar silhouette on the horizon, rigging intact, sails furled correctly, no distress signals. The ship drifts with purpose, not wrecked, not damaged, simply unattended. Another vessel approaches cautiously, hailing again and again, no answer. When boarding parties climb aboard, they find order. Provisions neatly stored. Tools return to racks, cabins clean. Logbooks open on desks, entries stopping mid-sentence, ink dried where the pen was set down. There is no sign of struggle, no blood, no evidence of panic. It is as if the crew stood up calmly and walked away together. The logs record this with careful restraint. Crew absent. No bodies discovered. Ship seaworthy. You sense the fear beneath the discipline. A ship without crew is not a mystery. It is a question with no acceptable answers. In several cases, the last recorded location is near one of the impossible ports. Not always at the quay, sometimes just outside the harbour mouth. sometimes days after departure. The pattern is subtle but persistent. These ships have visited the ports and stayed too long. You read one recovered log where the handwriting slowly changes over successive days. Letters round out, spacing widens, the tone grows softer, almost dreamy. The captain writes of feeling unburdened. He wonders whether command is necessary at all. The final entry reads, "Crew agrees to rest." There is no record of departure. The ship was later found drifting far from any port. Another vessel's log ends with a list, not of cargo or repairs, but of names. Each crew member listed once in neat columns. At the bottom, a final line, all accounted for. When the ship is found, none of those names correspond to anyone aboard. You feel the quiet horror in this section, but it is not loud horror. It is the horror of absence, of something gentle taken too far, of forgetting becoming permanent. The recovered ships show signs of recent activity even when found weeks later. Lamps still warm, food freshly prepared but untouched, a kettle boiled and set aside. The sense is not abandonment in haste, but abandonment by choice or by fading. You begin to understand that leaving the port is not always enough. The mind must also leave. Those who stay too long, who allow the softening to deepen, may lose the thread that pulls them back to themselves. When that happens, movement alone cannot restore what has been loosened. One Admiralty report, summarised tersely in the margins of a log, notes that recovered ships are often recommissioned after cleansing rituals, airing sails, repainting hulls, replacing logbooks entirely. Crews assigned afterward report nothing unusual. The sea resumes its ordinary behaviour. It is as if the ship itself remembers nothing. But the old logs remain. You read of one particularly unsettling case, a ship found drifting with its anchor deployed, lines neatly coiled as if ready to dock. The position suggests it attempted to anchor in open sea. The seabed shows no marks. The anchor hangs uselessly in water too deep to hold. The implication settles slowly. The crew believed they were still at a port. You pause there, letting that sink in. A harbour so convincing it can be carried inside the mind. A sense of arrival that no longer requires stone or light. The Tartarian symbols appear here only once, small and deliberate, beside a single phrase written in a different hand. Failure to detach. That feels important. Not capture, not loss. Failure to detach. As you grow sleepier, you sense the wisdom forming underneath the fear. These ports offer rest, balance, clarity, but only temporarily. They are not destinations. They are interludes. Treat them as endings, and you risk becoming unmoored from the world that requires motion, friction, desire. The logs never describe what happens to the missing crews. No bodies are found, no survivors return. There are no screams recorded, no last stands, just quiet disappearance. Perhaps they stepped into the city beyond the quay. Perhaps they followed sound into stone corridors that did not lead back. Perhaps they simply let go. The sea does not tell. The section ends with a warning written by a different hand than the rest, perhaps added later by someone who understood too late. Port is not a home. The ink is darker, pressed harder into the page, as if the writer wanted the words to remain. You turn the page carefully, because you sense the story narrowing now. From vanished crews to signals to those who watched from afar and began to notice patterns they could no longer ignore. The fires are never meant to be seen by everyone, and that is why you almost miss them in the logs. They appear in passing, tucked between weather notes and course corrections, mentioned as if they are routine observations. This is where you begin to understand that the impossible ports are not isolated wonders, but parts of a quiet network spread across the seas. You imagine a lookout on night watch, eyes drifting across dark water, when a brief flare catches his attention. Not lightning, not a ship's lantern, a controlled flame raised and lowered, twice in slow sequence, far beyond any coastline. The sailor reports it without excitement. Signal observed. No attempt to chase it, no assumption that it is meant for them. As you read further, you see how often such signals appear near the same coordinates where strange ports have been logged in the past, or will be logged years later. Fires on cliffs that should not exist, lanterns bobbing in places too far offshore for any platform, reflections of light that do not behave like reflections at all. You sense the pattern forming gently. These are not distress signals. They are acknowledgements, confirmations that something is active, awake, listening. One captain notes seeing a sequence of 3 lights flash in response to his own ship's bell, even though the port itself does not appear that night. Another records a distant glow that fades the moment his ship alters course, as if the signal was satisfied once it was noticed. The sea feels suddenly populated, not crowded, but connected. You read of coded patterns emerging over time. Certain light arrangements correspond with safe passage through fog. Others seem to mark temporary harbours opening elsewhere. One log records a sailor recognizing a pattern he saw years earlier in a different ocean. He writes, "Same language, different coast." You feel the quiet thrill of that realization. The logs begin to suggest that ships are not the primary audience for these signals. They are secondary. The fires speak to one another across distances too great for ordinary communication. Harbour to harbour, node to node, the ships merely overhear. You notice how rarely these signals are pursued. Captains observe, record, and move on. There is restraint here, a learned caution. Those who chase lights too eagerly tend to encounter storms, compass failure, or disorientation. The sea itself seems to discourage curiosity that becomes pursuit. One particularly calm entry describes a ship anchored far from any known port when multiple signal fires ignite sequentially along the horizon, forming a gentle arc of light. The sailor on watch feels a profound stillness, as if listening in on a conversation not meant for him. The lights fade one by one. The night returns to normal. The Tartarian symbols appear densely here, arranged in chains that mirror the order of signal flashes. You sense that someone, somewhere, understood these as messages, status updates in a system older than flags or radio, a maritime nervous system quietly pulsing beneath recorded history. You begin to understand why official charts show nothing. These signals are not meant to guide trade routes or empires. They are meant to coordinate maintenance, to announce availability, to signal rest periods and closures. Ports open, ports close, the network breathes. As your thoughts slow, you imagine the oceans at night from above, dotted not with constant lights, but with brief intentional glows, appearing only when needed, vanishing without trace. A system designed to avoid attention, to function without accumulation, to persist by remaining peripheral. One log contains a rare moment of awe. The captain writes, "Sea feels inhabited." He does not mean crowded, he means cared for, watched over. The difference matters. You feel the lullaby rhythm deepen here. Fires flare, fires fade, messages pass unseen. The world continues its surface noise, wars, trade, storms, while beneath it, another conversation continues uninterrupted. The section closes with a quiet observation written in the smallest script yet. We are not alone out here. Not in fear, in acknowledgement. You turn the page gently, knowing the logs are approaching their most delicate point. If a network exists, then someone knows about it. And if someone knows, then someone has decided how much you are allowed to see. The silence begins on land, not at sea, and you can hear it in the way ink suddenly becomes cautious. You move into the next pages and notice a new kind of handwriting. Clerk's hands, not sailors' hands. Clean, uniform, and strangely empty. This is where the logs begin to brush against the Admiralty, the ministries, the offices where mysteries are not feared so much as managed. You imagine a captain returning from voyage, sunburned and tired, laying his logbook on a polished desk that smells of wax and paper. He does not dramatize what he saw. He does not ask to be believed. He simply submits his records as procedure demands. And for a brief moment, you think the story will move upward into investigations, committees, official curiosity. But instead, you watch it sink. The logs show a pattern. Entries about impossible ports are sometimes followed by gaps. Pages torn out cleanly, as if removed with care rather than panic. Coordinates inked over with thick lines. Port names replaced with bland phrases like unmarked harbour or temporary anchorage. One captain writes the full description, then later adds a second note in different ink. Entry amended per instruction. Per instruction. 2 words that feel heavier than any storm. You read of sailors being asked to rewrite portions of their logs before formal submission. Not threatened, invited, a gentle request, framed as clarification or standardization. A clerk points out that an uncharted harbour might reflect poorly on navigation competence. Would the captain prefer to describe it as a mirage, perhaps, or as temporary drift near shoals? The captain, practical and weary, sometimes agrees. Sometimes he refuses. When he refuses, the record does not explode into scandal. It simply disappears into filing. You notice how often captains mention returning to the same office weeks later to request copies of their own charts and notes, only to be told the documents are misplaced, archived, or under review. No anger is recorded, just the subtle recognition that their words have entered a system designed to absorb and flatten. One log includes a brief note of conversation in the margins. Admiralty man smiled, said better not to chase fog. The captain writes it as if it were advice, almost kindly delivered, and in a strange way it is, not a threat, a lullaby for curiosity, a soft hand guiding the mind away from sharp edges. You begin to feel that the Admiralty does not deny these ports. Denial would create friction, and friction creates heat, and heat draws attention. Instead, the system uses something more effective. It reduces importance. It turns the extraordinary into clerical noise. A port becomes unverified. A harbour becomes unreliable sighting. A moving quay becomes tidal anomaly. The language changes, and with it, the public reality changes too. People believe what is repeatable, what is named consistently. Alter the names, and you alter memory. You read of official charts being updated in strange ways, not with new ports added, but with warnings placed near regions where impossible ports were reported, unpredictable currents, magnetic disturbance, reduced visibility frequent. The warnings are real enough to justify caution, yet vague enough to avoid saying what is actually there. The sea becomes framed as dangerous rather than mysterious, and that framing discourages approach more effectively than any storm. Some captains seem to understand this. They stop writing full descriptions. Instead, they use codes, a small symbol in the margin, a repeated phrase like Tartarian order observed without details. The logbook becomes a conversation between sailors beneath the notice of clerks who are trained to look only for standardized information. You notice something else. When captains do report these ports openly, they often receive subtle consequences, not punishment, reassignment, a delayed promotion, an opportunity to serve somewhere far inland, away from ships and sea. Another captain writes that his crew was questioned separately, not harshly but repeatedly, until their stories blurred from repetition. The same method you saw at the port itself, soften the edges until the shape is gone. And yet the Admiralty cannot erase everything, because the sea keeps producing the same events, and sailors keep encountering them. So the system does something smarter. It channels the knowledge into quiet compartments. You read about restricted supplements to charts, private appendices shared only among certain captains. These documents are never official, they are never signed. They appear as whispered additions, light patterns to follow in fog, bearings that only make sense at night, symbols that mean do not linger. The Admiralty pretends not to know, while still allowing the guidance to circulate where it is needed. This is what makes the silence feel so deliberate. It is not ignorance, it is containment. As your mind grows sleepier, you begin to see how this benefits everyone involved. Empires avoid admitting there are infrastructures they do not control. Sailors avoid the burden of public disbelief. And the ports remain unclaimed, functioning quietly, offering balance without becoming property. One log records a rare moment of near confession. A clerk, alone with a captain, admits he has seen these reports for years. He says softly, "Some things keep ships alive. Some things keep nations stable. We file them differently." The captain does not reply. He simply writes the line down later, at sea, when no one is watching. You feel the weight of that sentence. File them differently. A world of secrets hidden not behind locked doors, but behind categories, labels, and routine. The Tartarian word appears again here, but it is handled strangely by official hands. In some files it is struck out. In others it is replaced with unknown. In a few it is preserved, but only in margins, only in faint pencil. The name itself seems to trigger a careful kind of discomfort, as if it points toward history that cannot be neatly folded into the modern story of expansion and conquest. You begin to understand that the Admiralty's silence is a kind of storm wall too, not wind and wave, but paperwork and procedure, a barrier that keeps most people from ever seeing the threshold, while allowing a few to pass when necessary. As the section closes, you find an entry from an exhausted captain who writes, "They asked me to be reasonable." He adds, after a pause, "Reasonable means forgettable." The ink is pressed hard into the page, as if he wants that thought to stay sharp. You sit with that softness, silence as management, secrecy as routine, and you realize the story is moving toward its biggest question now. If these ports are part of a network, and if officials have quietly guided knowledge around them, then what are the ports really for? You turn the page gently, ready to gather the hints into a single whispered theory, one that does not demand belief, only contemplation. The theory does not arrive all at once. It gathers itself slowly, like mist forming over still water, made not from a single bold claim, but from many quiet agreements between unrelated witnesses. You feel it as you read these pages, the sense that the writers are no longer just recording events, but circling an idea they are careful not to name too loudly. You imagine a captain alone in his cabin long after the crew has turned in, the ship moving steadily through calm seas. He reviews his logs not by date, but by pattern. Fog before arrival, sound before light, light before stone, stone before rest, storm before departure. Again and again, too consistent to be chance, too restrained to be fantasy. He begins to wonder what a port truly is, not a place to live, not a place to conquer, a place to pass through, a threshold. You read how captains across decades, nations and oceans independently arrive at similar language. Gateway. Interruption. Pause. One writes, port behaves less like harbour, more like hinge. Another adds, transition point between states. None of them elaborate. They do not need to. The words hover sufficient on their own. You start to see how everything fits together. The moving location, the refusal to be mapped, the softening of identity, the bending of time, the gentle enforcement of departure. These are not flaws, they are safeguards. Features of a system designed to prevent misuse. If these ports were merely cities, they would have been claimed, fought over, destroyed. If they were mere illusions, they would not repair ships or restore crews, but as gateways, temporary alignments between worlds, states, or layers of reality, they make a different kind of sense. You feel the idea settle into you without resistance. What if Tartaria was never an empire in the modern sense? What if it was a network of custodial points, maintenance nodes for civilization itself, not ruling humanity, not guiding it openly, but keeping it from tearing itself apart when the strain grows too great? You read one log where a captain speculates carefully that the ports appear most often along routes of extreme exhaustion, long crossings, dangerous waters, times of war or famine. The ports do not appear during easy voyages. They appear when ships are depleted, when crews are near breaking, as if the system monitors thresholds of stress, not coordinates. Another captain wonders whether these gateways connect not just places, but moments, whether a ship entering a Tartarian port is briefly stepping outside linear history, allowing repair without out cost. The logs do not confirm this. They simply leave the thought resting on the page like a stone placed gently on a grave. You notice how often the word allowed appears in these reflections. Allowed to enter, allowed to rent, allowed to leave. The ports do not invite, they permit. And permission implies criteria, conditions silently evaluated, never explained. You begin to understand why memory softens here, why ambition fades. A gateway must not be mistaken for a destination. The system discourages attachment the way a parent encourages a child not to cling too tightly to the doorway when it is time to go. Forgetting becomes mercy. The Tartarian symbols appear one last time in this section, arranged in a pattern unlike any before. Circles intersecting lines, repeated beside the phrase node active. You sense that this is as close as the logs ever come to naming the mechanism behind it all. A network, quiet. Distributed, ancient. You imagine the world overlaid with these invisible hinges, ports on sea and land, ruins that hum in wind, cities that seem older than history yet perfectly functional. Most remain dormant. A few awaken when needed. Civilization stumbles forward, unaware of the hand steadying it from beneath. As your breathing slows further, you realize this theory does not demand belief. It does not insist. It simply offers itself as a lens, one way of seeing the repeated kindnesses hidden in places where no kindness should logically exist. You think of the vanished crews again, and the warning feels clearer now. Gateways are meant to be crossed, not inhabited. Stay too long between worlds, and you risk belonging to neither. The final paragraph of this section is written in an older hand, faded but deliberate. The captain writes, "If Tartaria still exists, it is not behind us. It is beneath us, between steps, between breaths." You let that line echo gently as you turn the final page. The theory has been spoken. The pieces have been laid out. What remains now is not explanation, but rest. One last soft descent into the question that lingers after all stories fade. The last entry is never dramatic. It does not announce itself as an ending, and that is how you know it matters. You feel it in the way the handwriting steadies, as if the writer has finally accepted that some things are not meant to be solved, only carried quietly. You imagine the ship far from any coast now, the sea wide and patient, the sky open. The impossible ports are behind you, not erased, not denied, simply no longer present. The logbook lies open on the desk, pages filled with careful witnessing, restraint and wonder. And at the end, there is space. A pause. The final notes do not summarize events, they ask questions. What is a harbour, one captain writes, if not a promise that rest is possible? Another adds years later in a different hand. And what is humanity, if not a traveller between departures? You feel the story turn inward here, away from stone and fog and light, and toward you. You begin to see that the ports were never the true subject. They were mirrors. They reflected what sailors needed most at the edge of endurance: shelter, order, relief from constant striving. And when that need was met, the mirror withdrew, refusing to let comfort become captivity. The logs suggest, gently, that humanity may not be as alone or as abandoned as it sometimes feels. That beneath the noise of conquest and progress, there may exist quieter systems, older systems, designed not to elevate us, but to steady us. Not to rule, but to intervene just enough to keep the voyage going. You think of the recurring pattern one last time: arrival only when exhausted, departure only when restored, memory softening to prevent obsession, storms to discourage possession, silence to protect balance. None of it cruel, none of it kind in the sentimental sense either, just appropriate. The final captain writes one question and does not answer it. If such gateways exist for ships, might there be others for minds, for cultures, for entire eras? The ink fades there as if even the page grows tired of holding speculation. You close the logbook slowly in your mind, not because there is nothing left, but because there is nothing more that needs to be said. And now, as promised, the story begins to soften. You imagine the sea at night, no lights, no fog, no signals, just water breathing under stars. The ship moves steadily, carrying you forward without urgency. Whatever watches from beneath the world does not demand your belief. It has already returned you safely to your course. Your breathing slows. The questions no longer press. They drift like lanterns extinguished one by one, leaving darkness that is not empty, but calm. Perhaps Tartaria was never a lost empire. Perhaps it was a reminder, woven quietly into the world, that rest is part of the journey, that pauses are allowed, and that no one is meant to live forever in the in-between. The sea continues, the ship continues, and you too are allowed to rest now. The waves grow smaller now, their rhythm gentler, like a breath settling into sleep. You no longer feel the need to watch the horizon or listen for distant bells. The story has done what it needed to do, and it loosens its grip on you with care. You are safe on the water. You are moving forward. Nothing is asking anything of you. If there are hidden ports in the world, they do not need you to find them tonight. If there are quiet systems holding things together beneath the surface, they will continue their work without your attention. You have listened long enough. That is enough. Let your thoughts slow like sails being lowered at dusk. Let images blur at the edges, the stone quay, the soft lights, the fog that remembers, until they become less like questions and more like dreams that don't need interpretation. You do not need to decide what is true. You do not need to connect every dot. Some stories are meant to settle, not resolve. Feel the steady weight of the ship beneath you. Feel the gentle certainty of motion. Feel how the world keeps going even when you stop thinking about it. Whatever waits between places, between moments, between breaths does not rush you. It never has. So close your eyes now. Let the sea fade into a hush. Let the last lantern dim. End of script. Sweet dreams.